Hi everyone, Dr. Samantha Cottrera here for the Imagining a New We video blog, a video series designed to help history teachers and other history educators teach history in ways that are more meaningful, transformative, and inclusive for their students. Because Mondays are meaningful, I've been starting the fall with these little reflective videos on big pieces of theory that might be useful for integrating into your practice. And for the last 3 weeks, I have been using this as an opportunity to introduce the different chapters of my book, and I will for the next few weeks as well. We're on chapter 4. My new book is Transforming the Canadian History Classroom, Imagining a New We. I hope you have your copy. I hope you've downloaded the teacher's discussion guides. And please comment below about what you have thought. We're on chapter 4 right now, which is called Removing Complexity and Limiting Connection. I think, something like that. And I'll be honest, it was a really difficult chapter to write. It was a really difficult chapter to think through because in it, I used the case study of one Canadian history teacher that I met during my research period that despite really wanting to do the best for her diverse multicultural students, she continuously enacted practices in ways that limited connections and removed complexities from teaching Canadian history. And the case study is really supposed to show the gap there can be between your pedagogy, between the ideas that you want to bring to your teaching and learning, and your practice, how you actually enact that in the classroom. It was a really difficult chapter to write because I respect teachers so much, and the work in the classroom is so difficult that it is so difficult to identify ways to critique this work in ways that are respectful and reverential for this work, but can also point people in directions that are a little bit different than how they are going. One of the reasons why another reason why this chapter was difficult to write is because while this was part of my research, this teacher was not alone. I've been doing professional development for teachers and history organizations for about 20 years, but specifically with teachers for the last 5 to 10. And one of the reasons why I use this as a case study is because some of the things that the teacher was doing, I saw replicated in other classrooms, or in discussion boards, or in other ways. Teachers were communicating their difficulties of teaching teaching Canadian history to a complex transnational Canadian population. Another way to say that is I've heard other teachers talk about the difficulties of how we can teach Canadian history to students that look very different than the population that was here at Confederation, for example. They look different, but they are different in terms of their transnational and post-colonial connections across the world. So this is a moment in time. It's not indicative of the teacher's practice generally or in other classrooms. It was the research period allowed me to see these nuances and explore these nuances in ways that I've also seen in other classrooms. One of the things that the teacher did was say, we can get to things like Black history, for sure. We can get to that. That's important. But first, these students need to understand the Canadian chronology. They need to understand the Canadian history first, and then we can do the stuff that aligns with their grassroots, their personal histories. So in these Mondays Are Meaningful videos, I'm not quoting myself so much as bringing in other theoretical ideas. And one of the things that I really heard from this teacher and other teachers saying things like, first let's do chronology, then we'll get to the fun stuff, the more the different perspectives on the past. And I have an issue with this notion of perspectives on the past. It comes from my critiques of historical thinking, which I've talked about before, but just put that aside for a second. Eva Mackey wrote about the 1992 celebrations of Confederation, in which she was interacting with people that said things like, yeah, I'm very happy with a multicultural society, but those people need to understand Canada first. In her work, House of Difference, she talks about this Canada First orientation to understanding Canadian identity that really aligns with this notions of whiteness. When we say Canada First, what we're really doing is putting forth first a Canadian narrative that is a white, colonial, patriarchal, capitalist understanding of the past and the present, and then we will allow in difference. And so when I read Mackay's work, it was so similar to what I have heard from other teachers, including the one that I feature in this book, about, well, this notion of chronology allows us to put the Canadian narrative first, but the Canadian narrative that we're talking about is a white, patriarchal, colonial, capitalist understanding of what and who Canada is. So a question that I have in my reflection guide is, how do you understand chronology in the classroom? Are you using it as a way to put Canada, this white notion of Canada first, in a way that really puts at a disadvantage students, but also maintains this notion of white supremacy in the classroom? Now, let's just be clear. I'm not saying that chronology is not important in history. Of course it is. But when we are really focusing or even like fetishizing this notion of chronology, like big names, big dates, are we putting first a Canadian narrative that privileges the white supremacy, colonial aspects of our nation in a way that continuously harms the students in our classroom? I say yes, but I think there's a lot of nuance to the notion of chronology. It's just how we use it. So I urge you to think about Mackay's work in relationship to your notion of chronology to see if you are removing complexity from Canadian history by saying that there is this one Canadian narrative that comes first before else, and if this Canadian narrative is really just the maintenance of a white supremacist, patriarchal, colonial understanding of Canada. I would love it if you commented below to let me know what you thought of this chapter, and if you found that you found a lot of similarities or differences between what you've heard and experienced and even may have done yourself in your own classroom with this case study. All right, well, I hope that is a good introduction for the week. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and I'll see you next week.